So, Matt, how's it going?
It's going well, sir. How are you?
I'm good. Don't call me sir. So, I'm Brad. Right? It does say that I'm a colonel up there, but today I'm just Brad. And so I am. A senior manager at Accenture Federal Services, running one part of our cyber practice, and I do all things cyber across the FedGov space. I have a 24/7 team that helps run security for energy. So it's always interesting. I tell people I chase bad guys on a daily basis because I do, and not the brightest bad guys. They're especially the ones that decide to hang out and give us things to chase, which is good and bad all at the same time. In my other life, I'm a colonel in the Army Reserve. I'm a cyber warfare officer, and right now I'm the CIO of an Army division in the reserves, which keeps me out of trouble at least a little bit of the time. So, Matt.
Thanks, Brad. So, Matt Morris. My day job, I run defensive cyber operations for Booz Allen Hamilton. I am also an adjunct professor at University of Maryland Global Campus. I teach cybersecurity and cloud computing within the School of Information Technology and Cybersecurity. In my other life, I am a IMA to USASOC. So I'm the principal cyber advisor to Colonel Sparks, the G6, and it's amazing to be here with all of you. I will say that our talk is a little bit different. We want it to be very conversational in nature, and again, this isn't. Did you put the terminal learning objectives in here? No TLOs, right? All right. So we're just gonna hop right into it.
Absolutely, yeah. And to sort of frame this a little bit, right? So if you didn't know, we're gonna tell you how the cat's getting let out of the bag on the workforce, especially on the DoD side of the house. And if you're not aware, looking at my green suiters in the room, right? You're gonna go, uh-oh, right? And for everybody else, civilians, contractors, stuff like that, this is a sea change in terms of how we do stuff, and a lot of folks aren't aware that it's coming. And it drives directly into training and retaining our soldiers, airmen, guardians. Funny story, they stole that name from me, I'm just saying. Guardians, Coast Guardsmen, and airmen, right? I think I got all the services, and Marines, right? And my Marine friends. And so, and of course, all of the support staff, right? The contractors, the civilians, everybody's going to be affected by this. But at the same time, so who here thinks we have a retention problem in the cyber workforce? Everybody should raise your hand, because we do. I have bad news, we do. We're going to frame it for you and talk about it, but there is a huge problem for multiple reasons, right? One of those reasons, sometimes it's pay, right? Sometimes it's, they're again, sometimes it's a good move. Hey, tier 1 guy moving up to be a tier 2 guy someplace else and, making the next move. We like that. That's good, right? But then there's the people that just bolt out of the blue, disappear, and you're like, where'd they go, right? And hopefully some of the stuff we're going to talk about helps us to get to better retaining those folks. But again, it's going to take this is an all of us problem, right? I see it in my day job. I see it in my Army job. I see it at the graduate level where I teach, right? Where I get a little frustrated with the quality of the students that come in, right? They're trying really hard, but somebody said, hey, you should do this cyber thing. You make lots of money. And they come in with the wrong sort of, perspective on things. So I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Absolutely, Brad. To just piggyback off of that, there goes my Army term for the day. I will say that, look, all of us here at MCPA, if you're participating in this event and you took time out to come here today, you're part of the solution, right? And that's what I think is powerful about why we're here. It is very hard to retain this talent. And to Brad's point about the tier 1 moving up to tier 2, hopefully within your organization, right? Because if they leave your organization and go somewhere else, now the individual that knew how to pivot from ArcSight into ELK, and then, go into the endpoint security solution to, be able to triage a particular alert, that person left, right? And what could we have done to retain that individual? And not only that, but from a knowledge management perspective, did we have systems in place to know, what that individual was doing? What was the special sauce behind the trade craft?
You want to take this one?
Absolutely, yeah. I made the buzzwords for this slide.
You did make the buzzwords for this.
So if you hate it, I'll take some feedback a little bit later. So we're going to recruit, train, and retain. So bringing people in, spinning people up, and then keeping people within the organization. We just underscored what that looks like. it was already pretty damn hard to do that. Meaning, if we had SANS tokens, if we had CISSP course, if we had CompTIA things that they could go to, right? That's great. However, that 8570 chart that we all hopefully have seen and have had to deal with, either from an acquisitions perspective or searching for a job and getting into a position, or being in a position and a contract change or an organizational shift happening, that chart is going away. All right. So I'm kind of framing up the problem, which is bleeding into the next slide, but 8570 came on the street in 2005, right? December of 2005. And this 8570 was a workforce improvement program for cyber, right? So if we bring people in, what is the minimum bar, right? It since had changed over the 10 years that it was in existence. So 2015, it got phased out. Before this, I didn't know that history because it really didn't hit me in the head working either as a defense contractor or on the Army side. We were still operating under 8570. Typical DoD things, right? We bring in something to sunset the old thing, it takes a while. Well, I have news. The DoD Cyber Workforce Board basically came in, and in February of 2023, there is a mandate that says by February of 2024, contracts and organizational workforces that are under OSD or Department of Defense have to transition to this new model that we're going to describe. And I'm kind of getting ahead of this, but I'll just stop it with this and I'll pass it back over, right? So what this really means for us is 8570 had that chart. Well, 8140 then improves it with a show me, tell me. So there is a component where if you're a cyber defense analyst, which we actually pulled this specific work role out, you have to be able to carve traffic, analyze that traffic, compare it against resident security apparati, right, that you have in place within your organization. There's an on-the-job component. From a cyber perspective, we have JQSs and JQRs, right? Well, what does that mean for the civilian organization that isn't in a cyber warfighting function? So this is what our talk is kind of getting into and what we want to stimulate.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about recruiting, spinning people up, and retaining people, this hopefully becomes a good baseline. If you haven't read 8140, you're going to need to read 8140 because it really changes the way we sort of look at workforce as a whole. And we'll touch on that later. But so here's my next audience participation question. Who thinks that the job listings at your company, you don't have to tell me your company, I don't care. And I'm going to raise my hand here. How job listings at your company are the best job listings ever, and that you're going to be able to hire the cyber talent that you need, right? Nobody's raising their hand, right? Because we don't know how to write them, right? And so if you talk with an HR professional, and they go and they find some exemplar thing, and I've had this conversation internally when it talks to recruiting. It's like, do you understand what you're going to have to pay for what you just wrote? And they're like, what do you mean? I go, you just asked for a golden unicorn to come dancing out of the forest and say, huzzah, I'm here, and do your stuff, and you're going to pay them $500,000. And they're like, really? And I go, yes. The combination of things you wrote in that job requisition are literally going to cost you a large chunk of change. And most HR professionals don't realize that. And again, are there people out there like that? Oh, absolutely. And are they worth their weight in gold? Oh, absolutely. But most organizations, especially that support the government, don't necessarily have the budget to do that. And so it has to be a balance, and you have to tailor what you're looking for. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's hold that on to that.
Yeah.
At least from the Air Force perspective, the additional challenge is I don't even get to look for the unicorn. I get handed the donkey, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm told you need to make this person, make this donkey a
Yes.
unicorn, right?
And then if it succeeds, they take them away.
That's
Yes.
right. Yes. You
runs away.
exactly right. You're exactly right. And that comes to when we spin people up, and then can we retain them, right? Now, the military's in a unique position, kind of, right? Because in some cases, we can say, look at certain skill set, you have to have a longer term enlistment. So if we drop X amount of whatever the budget is for, say, a 17 Charlie enlisted person in the Army these days, right, to spin them up and get them smart, we are able to hold on to them for at least 6 years. But I will tell you, on both the Guard, Reserve, and active component, Army-wise anyways, we're hemorrhaging talent right now, right? And we didn't meet our recruiting goals last year across the board. And I had a conversation. I was actually at annual training last week, and I had a conversation with the young E6, young E4, who first term, signal soldier. And I said, hey, so that's your first term. This is an active duty kid. What do you think? Are you going to stick around? I said, I'm not into rating chain. It doesn't matter, right? I'm curious, right? He said, no, I'm not going to stick around on active duty. I said, well, I hope you'll consider the Guard and Reserve. Shameless plug for the Reserve component, because I've done both of those. But it's like we have this. We are in the military side of the house really, really challenged with this right now. And to your point, Lieutenant Colonel, we absolutely, right? We build up these people, we make them smart, we make them great, and then all of a sudden we move on to the next job. And that becomes problematic for organizations at large. And this is where, when you look at our pacing threat of China and near peer adversaries, right? They understand that, right? And we don't yet. And we think the 8140 thing will hopefully drive to that, because if you have to, have everybody in your workforce go through a JQS, right? And establish that baseline of knowledge, whether they're a civilian, a contractor, or a military member, we're probably going to look at that and go, oh, if we do that for that person, we shouldn't just move them automatically. We should look to keep them at least a little bit of a homestead so we don't lose that talent, right? So on to the next one.
Yeah, we're good at the first two, bad at the last.
Yes.
Right, bottom line, we're not good at the retainment piece. So, getting ahead of that is key. So, all right.
Hey, it's the table.
Yeah,
We got the table on here, right? So yes, everybody do this, right? No more at the table. We don't like the table anymore, right? I don't know. It was funny, like when I stood up the Cyber Protection Team 174 in the Colorado Guard, it was like this moving target. They're like, oh, you need to be this, and so they send us to some training, and we do that training, and they go, oh no, totally, we totally screwed that up. You need to go over here and do this, right? So I don't know how many of those certs I have on there. But literally, the Army spent $1 bazillion on my cyber protection team to actually do a lot of the stuff on that table so that we could fit into all the different, well, if you look at FM 314 or FM 312 or JP 312 and all the different things, DCORA, DCOIDM, DOD and Ops, yada, yada, all that stuff. I'm pretty sure my cyber protection team could do all of those things, at least in certifications. Now, to your point, if you want to jump in and talk about this thing here, the cyber defense analyst, this is where the rubber's going to meet the road.
Absolutely. So, all right, on the bottom left, just to orient you, we still have a certification matrix. It is not the sexy table that we were previously used to. That is no longer going to be a thing. So the certifications still are in play. If you go onto the website and pull this down, it'll have a few things there. Right? It'll have the spreadsheet with the certifications that are there, and it'll have the work roles. So we wanted to pick a thread, and the thread that we wanted to pick was cyber defense analyst. So the key piece of this, in the middle, you have the 511 cyber defense analyst, and you have the education, training, certification. I know in the back you probably can't see this, but bottom line is you have experience, on the job qualification, and that's what gets us. And at the bottom you have annual maintenance. So in addition to your CPE requirement, CE requirement that you have for your certification, there will be a 8140 requirement to generate 20 CPEs per year towards that specific work role. What does that mean? That means it's another.
We got a fan.
It's another administrative burden to us. But that, let's say you're doing something super cool and you're not at your unclassed terminal all the time to update this information, and you're somewhere else, right? Not only are you having to log in and do your ISC squared, your CompTIA, your SANS, but this is an additional requirement that can disqualify you from a work role perspective. So just something to keep in mind. Now,
what's that?
The contractors in the room are going crazy.
Yeah.
Right. So on the right, you have basic, intermediate, and advanced. And Brad actually kind of broke this down into a upside down pyramid that we'll see. Yeah, we'll get to that slide, which I like a little bit better. But that said, just know we had basic, intermediate, and advanced before. it was baked into the job posting, right? So it was baked into what the minimum bar was of that $500,000 a year unicorn. Now it was baked into a specific role. So if I need somebody that's advanced, what does that look like from a GS level, right? From a civilian perspective? What does that look like from a acquisition and contractual perspective? And what does that look like from a green suit perspective, right? When we're in the fight and I have to bring in CPT members that are under a mission element or on a crew that are specific to either a cyber defense analyst role or an intel analyst role. So that's what's on the right here. These will be available for you, these slides. So just take a look.
Well, and I think one of the key things that's really interesting here, right? And so we were, as we were going through this, we said, man, this feels a lot like the risk management framework and CMMC. If you look at sort of the implementation, now granted, 8140 has been around for a while, right? DoD workforce didn't drop the hammer until this year, right? So we've had a lot of time with this thing. We just haven't figured out that this is where we need to go. RMF and CMMC, real similar kind of implementation when you really think about it, right? And they've actually had a huge impact, right, on contracts, whether you can win a contract, because again, speaking from the contractor perspective, right? If you're not meeting certain goals or steps along the way in that, guess what happens? You might not actually, make it to the final list of folks bidding on a particular piece of work, right? At the same time, right, this has affected the DoD, right, as a whole, right? And if you look at like RMF, right, that's sort of spread across FedGov. CMMC is on its way, right? So is like this kind of thing something that actually becomes a wider application across the FedGov space? It's quite possible. Usually the DoD sets some of these standards out, and then the rest of the federal government says, well, probably should adopt that because why not, right? We don't have to rewrite anything. So it's going to be a really interesting impact, right? I think, though, again, if you think of it that way, right, it's a different way to look at it because it's like, again, there's a lot to unpack here, right? An absolute lot to unpack. And like questions I have is like, if you're bidding on work, do you have to walk in the door with your JQS done already? Or do you get a certain amount of time after you start the work to do it, right? There's so many of those implementation questions at the acquisition and contractual level that haven't been answered yet. Right, so it's very, very interesting.
On the next slide, I brought in the RMF and CMMC just to orient us. And to Brad's point, just to add another piece to it, not only does it smell and feel like government frameworks that are put in place and that we have to work with and maneuver with in order to do business. If you want to operate on DoD, you need to have an SSP, right? And with an SSP, you have to have an ATO. ATOs are not super sexy, but it's part of the RMF. Right? It's how when you commit money to build an information system, you have it secured and we can defend it.
Well, it's like FedRep on the FedGov side. If you want to,
yes.
if you want to get to ATO faster, right? Get FedRep,
yep.
Right? So so we've seen this story before.
Yep. But also the workforce piece of it as well. For the RMF component and for CMMC, you have to have a qualified workforce. So Brad is bringing up a great point because at least from a cyber perspective and with the cyber warfighting functions, we have evaluation systems and criteria. This is hitting the civilian and contractor sector, defense industrial base and beyond. What does that look like coming in the door as quote unquote qualified? So
no, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. All right, the problem. Oh yeah, love this one. Budgets. Everybody agree? Budgets. We have all the money we need, right?
Yeah, on the left we have the cybersecurity problem.
I love this one. Yeah, this is I found this meme when we were building this presentation. So here's what cybersecurity says we're going to do, and then I love my favorite one on this slide is the phone with a wire actually still, right? My kids are amazed by these things. They go, "What's that?" But we look at we like to talk people, process, technology, cybersecurity, privacy, right? But here's the thing. Right? In the end, regardless of whether you're a government organization, right, or a civilian entity, commercial entity, whatever, right? A lot of it comes down to budgets that you have, right? And so it's going to be very interesting when we start working at the people piece of this, specifically out of 8140, what that's going to do to budgets and how that's going to impact things. If you're a government entity and you're told you have to do X, Y, and Z, a la RMF, a la CMMC, to play, right? Where does that investment dollar come from? right? And that's a big challenge with this, especially for again, contract. Civilians, I'm not really sure yet, right? We've talked about this, and it's going to take some time. The model they were going with, if you're familiar with the term ION, right? This is where this is coming from, right? So the construct of what they're doing with these job quality, these JQSs and things like that are built this. I lived this when I did a national cyber mission, right? We had to meet those job qualification standards to actually sit in the seat to do what we did, right? So very similar construct here. Are there civilian ions? Yes, right? So we kind of know how to do this, right? But there's an entirely different thing here because it's not just that focused ion role, it's now the defense analysts and the intel analysts. It's a much bigger pool that we have to tackle now.
Agreed. Only thing I would add to it is the last piece, the integration of new technologies. So we have generative AI, which, as we all know, like everybody is messing around with that now, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Bard, what have you. That is a new technology, right? So a lot of vendors are rushing and saying, hey, this can solve X, Y, and Z problem. And it's like, okay, let's give that a shot. Let's figure it out from a security operations, automation and response perspective, a SOAR perspective. Let's throw in ChatGPT to assess what's going on, and generative AI hit off, our SOC team with some potential mitigations. That is a new technology that's implemented. If we don't look at the implications from a cyber workforce perspective, now what does it look like when I have somebody come off the street who is from another command, who was a civilian or a contractor that went through a JQS, JQR process and never touched ChatGPT in their entire life, right? What does that look like with that new technology? So that's just an additional consideration.
And I would say, public service announcement. Don't give your proprietary data to ChatGPT. You're not getting it back, right? So just about PSA. So I'll jump on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to hit on the requirements. So this goes back to, I believe, the next slide. We have the unicorn. Unicorns do not exist, right? In some cases, we're given donkeys or what have you, right? But it doesn't matter what you're given; it's what you make out of that situation. So the technology roadmap that we have for an organization must be realistic and attainable, right? It must be something that we can tackle and that we can do. I'm going to pick on the generative AI thread some more. If it's something that we say as an organization we want to bake in and we want to do, if we don't have associated training and a roadmap for that, right? If I have this new shiny thing, then it doesn't make sense to integrate it, right? If it's the CISO, if it's the CIO talking to the CEO, who then has the ear of the CFO, that is an organizational construct that we have to know and observe, and as practitioners, be able to observe and work with. So that's number one. It must be realistic and attainable. And then the requirements must be updated and reviewed. So if we develop these, and this is not a super sexy topic. It is not like the last talk that we had. But that said, we have to be sure that these requirements are updated and reviewed. And then and I love this one, if a technology has only been around for 10 years, nobody is going to possess 20 years of experience in said technology, right? How many times have we seen that? I guarantee you go on the web right now and 10 years of experience in ChatGPT is a thing. It literally came out 2 months ago.
I have 10 years of
yeah. But that said,
talked about that one. We got a couple things here. So the upside down pyramid, right? I do this because when I teach at the graduate level, so one of the things I run into is my students that take my class and go, okay, I've taken a class, I'm going to go take the CISSP exam. And I'm like, you were in my basic class, right? We couldn't do virtualization on your M2 Mac because don't buy that for a virtualization. But and you didn't get, you were learning, right? So that does not make you a CISSP. And really what we see is like, I talk to so many people that say, oh, I want to just do all this on keyboard stuff. I'm going to do these things, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. Somebody has to tell you that there's a chunk of time you're not on keyboard, right? Who here likes writing reports? Anybody? Okay, nobody. I didn't think so. What Matt does, actually. And it's real. And thank God for Matt because I suck at writing reports these days. But in all seriousness, right, helping educate folks to say, look, you have to start with some general skills and then work your way down. Right, and we have to understand, right, when we're looking at this talent pool and sharpen that, is how do we get somebody from an apprentice to a master level, and get to that, and then help them get in where they fit in, right? There are, I work with my grad students all the time where they walk in the door and they're like, I want to do this cyber thing, and it's like, okay, let's talk about where you need to go, right? Like, especially ones that don't come in with a lot of skills or experience, because that can be very challenging. So we'll jump into there. Go.
Yep. So we have NICE, which is our National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. The NICE description has that common lexicon. So when we're talking in these requirements that we talked about before for job postings, or revising that job posting, or kind of talking within the organization from a human resources and being able to attract, retain, and train, this is where you need to look, this 181. So you can also combine it with the DOTM 8140 for maximum effect. This will be available. The stuff is probably too small to see anyways, so check out the slides after. Next one. And then standardization. So we do have the CISA NICS tool. I love this tool. So I left the URL purposely so you can zoom in on the slide to see where it's at. And basically you can look at specific specialty areas to see KSAs that are tied to that, right? Knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required for that. This should all drive into requirements and postings for positions.
Oh yeah, collaboration. This is important here, right? Here's the thing. So we've got NIST NICE, we've got CISA NICS, we have we have 8140, right? And guess what they do and don't do? They don't all talk to each other, right? Interestingly, NICE came out to help standardize the workforce across FedGov, but DoD didn't necessarily go that way. Not a bad thing, but at some point, right, like I said, I think we're going to see this coalesce into a more common standard for the FedGov space. And ultimately, JQSs tied, and the JQRs that follow after you make the JQS are going to drive a lot of how we do that, right? And here's the thing that I think is really important here. We've got to bring our industry partners along in this journey across the board, because everybody that's going to have cyber workforce roles, right? And we've got what DoD's trying to do, we've got what FedGov's trying to do in the broader space, and it's like, and we've got the cyber acceptance service now. There's all of these things that are happening, but we're kind of disconnected, right? DoD's moving out one way, FedGov's moving another way, and it's really, really important that we get that synchronization and collaboration happening, or we're going to end up with more job roles and things like that. We're going to have a retention problem because people aren't going to know what to do or where to go. I think, yeah, text in. We got time for like a question or two, Carl?
Well, actually, the last speaker is not here.
Okay.
Unless that person shows up, you can keep.
Let's keep on going. What question? So let's talk. So what do you guys think? So first off, is this the first you've seen like this whole adventure with 8140? Some of you have seen that, have seen this before. Some of you have not seen this before.
Who came up with it?
Who came? Well, that's a good question. I don't know who wrote that.
Yeah, so DoD wrote 8140. They generated it.
Who in DoD?
So
Yeah,
it was a
that's
DoD Cyber Workforce Group. Created it. It's pretty interesting. I will say the show me tell me component, I was not expecting seeing it there. Again, they initially wrote this tail end of 2015 into 2016. Nobody really, it didn't have teeth, right? Nobody was really implementing it. From an 85-70 perspective, people were still using that. But when in February of this year, when they said the drop dead date and when we're going to implement this thing is February of next year, I had to bring it up to Brad. I was like, we need to talk about this because this is coming. So to your point, it was the DoD Cyber Workforce Group.
So what's the probability of success here? Because I mean, it sounds like we're looking for a use.
So I'll put my Colonel Rhodes hat on for just a minute. 50-50, maybe, right? This is the challenge. And I know there was a panel on potential cyber force and all these things like that. It's really going to be service dependent how well it's executed, and each of the services does things a little differently, and that's a big challenge today. And so, honestly, in my service in the Army, we've looked at it because we actually got a tasker that came down through the G6 channels to say, hey, we need to identify all these positions and map them to this. Oh yeah, and you got to get it done by July 31st. And I went, oh, there's an actual impact to this thing, right? And that's my soldiers and my civilians on my Army side. And I was not expecting that. I was like, wow, we're actually going to try to do this. And that came down from CIO G6. all the way down to my division level. So it's happening. The question is, to your point, is how well? Don't know, right? It's going to be a very interesting challenge as we go forward.
I have a question more as it relates to the commercial side.
Sure.
We spent some time there. You put this up there and you showed it in the work roles, a lot of certifications, right? Certifications are training, you train for the known, you educate for the unknown. Yet you've kind of had this push that cybersecurity professionals supposed to go in the commercial sector need to have a degree. Sure. And yet we also have this job deficit, right? And space deficit. We can't get people out fast enough. Just comments and thoughts. How do you need a degree in this commercial side? Do you see more flexibility on the commercial side?
So no, it's a good question. It's a good question, Carm. It's really organizational dependent. That's what I've seen. Some organizations are willing to take a risk on somebody that doesn't have a degree but has the requisite experience and professional certifications, and usually very successful. I tell people that I mentor all the time. I have the folks that come in, they go, all right, I'm going to go get my master's degree in cybersecurity. And I'm like,
Why?
why? No, seriously. That's honestly my question. I will ask them, well, like, why? And they go, well, because I'm going to get it, and I'll be able to, get this job, make good money. And I'm like, I said, I tell people this way: if you don't have a degree, right, get some practical experience, get a couple of pro certs, right, start at that tier 1 level, get those general skills like was up there on the slide, and then you want to progress, maybe look at a degree. I tell people that if you have a degree already, I don't care what your degree is in. Your degree could be in under butter basket weaving for all I care. It does not matter, right? If you've got a college degree, one, it shows me that you can stick to something and get to the end of something, but go get a couple of pro certs, get some experience, same kind of path. If people already have if people have a master's degree, right? I tell them, get some pro certs, right? Do that kind of stuff, right? I've had people that go, I'm going to go back to school and do this. And I go, but you already spent that time and money to get that other degree. Why not, look at what you got out of that degree and then maybe apply those skills elsewhere. So it's kind of a counterintuitive thing, and it sounds a little contrarian, right? But I will tell you, what I've seen in the commercial space, and it's very interesting, right? Because this will be interesting, because I think will happen with this is that people that are in the DoD spaces, the federal spaces, as this thing gets rolled out, they're going to stay in those spaces because there's going to be a pretty good knowledge of what you're going to do for specific job roles. If you go to hire somebody from the commercial sector, right, they may or may not fit this mold, right? So what are we doing with 8140? We're creating another mold that we're going to try to fit people into. Not necessarily a bad thing.